video related to symbolic interaction. In this one, we're going to focus specifically on the dramaturgical approach. Now, as you should remember, because hopefully you just watched the other video, this brand of symbolic interaction goes back to Erving Goffman, who was a famous sociologist in the 50s. He really helped explain symbolic interaction. He helped us understand this idea of face work. He helped us understand this idea of taking a line. You should have worked your way through a short excerpt from his book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And again, this is going to be useful for the photo essay assignment for sure, especially this video that I'm recording, but it also could be the basis for your sociological autobiography. Now, in the dramaturgical model, this is again a type of symbolic interaction. So symbolic interaction is this bigger way, this orientation that sociologists have where they focus on the ways people interact with each other and how we build meaning through exchanging symbols, through the language that we use. Could be the verbal language, could be physical language, it could be the clothing we wear, it could be looking at the buildings that we create, right? All these ways that we communicate to each other. Could be communicating the group that we're part of, could be communication, our power in society, anything, right? Something as specific as a wedding ring is an example of symbolic interaction. So another approach that Goffman has is this dramaturgical model. And for the dramaturgical model, he takes this quote from Shakespeare, this famous quote from As You Like It, which one of Shakespeare's plays. I actually don't like Shakespeare at all, but it's still useful to think about where Goffman got this idea from. And so the quote is, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts." This, in a sense, is using the ideas of theater to look at our experiences in the everyday world. We are born and we enter a stage, and when we die, we exit. And in between, there's all these different roles that we can play. Much like theater, there is a front stage and a backstage. And for any of you who are part of theater, who have watched theater, you know that the front stage is where the performance actually takes place, right? That's where you show the audience the things that you want them to see. This is the presentation of yourself that you want others to see. Generally, it's that idea of face, right? The positive versions of yourself. Sometimes you might want someone to see a negative version of yourself, but you are choosing what to perform, right? This is where you give off the impression of who you are, or perhaps what your business is, right? Or what your group is. Whatever that thing is that you're trying to present to the other person, this is where you demonstrate the qualities that you want them to see, the things that you want them to associate with you. There's a few different parts of the front stage. These are terms you should know. They're useful, but I'm pretty sure I use all of these on the quiz, so make sure you understand it before you take the quiz. And then again, when you write a paper, when you write that photo essay, when you do the photo essay, these are connections you can make. First element of front stage, the setting itself. Right? Think about in a theater. When you watch a play, if you're trying to communicate that it's on an island, you'll have a backdrop of the ocean, of sand, of palm trees, right? The stage, in a sense, provides an understanding or the context for the performance. It establishes the type of performance that can or will take place. If the setting doesn't match the performance, it's not going to be believable, even if the performance is the exact same. What would be an obvious example? Think about the professor, right? If you come to class and I'm holding a textbook and reading from it, you start taking notes, right? I'm sharing knowledge with you. Here's this professor in front of the room that's telling me things that I need to know. If I'm doing the exact same thing outside of a subway stop in the middle of the Bronx or in the middle of Brooklyn or Queens, I'm doing the exact same thing where I'm outside a subway stop dressed the exact same way in my black pants and blue dress shirt, and I am reading from a sociology textbook, you're probably going to give me space, right? You're going to assume that something's wrong with me. You're not going to stop and take notes. You're not going to listen to me thinking I have some sort of wisdom, right? So all that's changed is the setting. Everything else is the exact same, but the setting establishes what you think is going to happen. When you enter a setting that you're familiar with, you immediately know how to act. And you can even think about how little things make a difference. If you enter a classroom and the walls are not in good shape or the windows are broken, you're probably going to think, wow, this school isn't as good. Doesn't even matter if the exact same thing takes place. The setting affects how you perceive things. All right. Next term that you need to know. Personal front. The personal front is the appearance of the individual, right? The thing that the individual is presenting. A lot of overlap with face work here. There's aspects of your personal front that are more permanent and some are more temporary, right? I am not going to change my height. I am not going to change my size. I'm not going to change my skin color. I am not going to change my gender in a quick way, right? I'm not simply going to say, oh, I want to act in a different way today. I'm going to change all those qualities about myself. Those are more permanent qualities that are not going to be different next week. That affects the performance that I can give to you, right? There's certain roles I could take on that are made easier by my skin color, and there's certain ones that are made more difficult. Same with gender, same with height, right? If I were 7 feet tall, you would interact with me in a different way than if I were 4 feet tall. Those are two different, more permanent qualities. There's also temporary qualities. I can get a different haircut. I could shave. I could put on a different sweatshirt. I could get glasses or not get glasses, right? Those are things that I can actually change that could go along with the performance. And each of those qualities, whether permanent or temporary, they affect whether you believe the things that I'm saying. Think about that example again of teaching you material, right? The setting matters a lot. If I'm in front of that subway, you understand who I am in a different way. But imagine if you come into class on the very first day and I'm wearing cut-off jean shorts and a tank top, and I'm trying to teach you the exact same stuff. You might be like, what is going on with this person? Why is he wearing this really tight tank top and cut-off jean shorts when he's teaching us, right? I'm doing the exact same thing. I have the same background. I have the same knowledge. But me choosing not to have the appearance that matches the setting makes something seem askew. So going along with personal front, you can think about there's more permanent, more temporary qualities. You could also think about another way to divide it up is think about appearance, right? The physical aspects, and manner, what I actually do. So there's all these different ways that I can change my physical appearance to you. Eyeshadow or not having eyeshadow, earring or not having an earring, parting my hair or not parting my hair, shaving or not shaving. Those are all appearance. Mannerism is another thing. Am I smiling? Do I present myself as happy? Am I loud? Am I soft? So I can change personal front, including my appearance, personal front, including my manners. The other thing that's key is when I'm doing so, I'm going to be playing certain roles. We move through all these roles in life. Each role has a prescribed or basically pre-established front, a way that you think that you're supposed to act in that role. If I tell you to act like a doctor, you are going to have an idea in your head of how you're supposed to look, how you're supposed to carry yourself, how you're supposed to talk to other people. If I told you to imitate a jazz musician, you're going to shift your front, which includes your appearance and your manners, right? If I tell you to act like a professor or a teacher, you're going to have a sense of how to act. If I tell you to act like a server who works at a restaurant, you're going to act in a different way. All those things have a collection of cultural ideas of how you are supposed to act, right? And the front stage is where you put those things forth. We could have an activity in class where we just perform different roles and think about how we would change, how loud we are, how soft we are, our posture, how we carry ourselves, what we're wearing, right? All those things. When you go into a job interview and you're interviewing to be an accountant, you're going to dress in a very particular way. You're going to figure out, how can I make myself fit this role? But then there's also the backstage, right? The front stage is where the performance takes place. The backstage is where you get ready. The backstage is the place where all aspects of yourself show, both positive and negative, those qualities of your personality that you might hide when you go to the front stage. This is the place where you can be out of face without it damaging the interaction. Other people, in a sense, are part of your team there. You have trust. You're revealing aspects of yourself that you wouldn't with other people. It is important to have people where this can take place. We don't all have that, right? That person where you can let your guard down, where you can cry, where you can be scared, where you can admit that you're struggling with things and not be perfectly in that role, right? Fitting those pre-established fronts, not making sure that you're not just engaging in that same type of face work, but instead you can get ready for it, right? Before you go to the job interview, you hang out with your friends and you talk about how you're nervous and they give you some advice and you get psyched up and then you go do that thing. If you're on a team, imagine you're on a team in basketball and you're going to play and you're really nervous because it's a championship game and you know the other team is better than you and you're doubting yourself, right? When you go out front, when you actually run out of that locker room, you have to act confident. If you're showing weakness, if you're showing fear, if you're crying and shaking, that other team is going to pick up on it. The audience is going to pick up on it. Backstage with your other teammates, some of them you probably can admit how you're feeling and you can together work to psych yourself up. Or maybe when you're with your team, you're already in your front stage personality and it's your roommate back in the dorm who you can actually have that honest backstage interaction with, right? So you got the front stage, you got the backstage. Tons of examples of this. Think about something like the prom or a wedding, right? Backstage, you're putting your makeup on, you're trying to tie your dress or to tie a tie. Maybe you don't know how to tie a bow tie. You don't know how to get it clipped to, or if you have to clip it to yourself, you don't know how to do that. You don't know how the tuxedo is supposed to work. Maybe you actually don't like the way you look in the outfit that you have. Maybe you're really unhappy about the person that you're going to prom with, right? All that stuff backstage, there's there's energy, there's nervousness, there's energy, there's excitement. All that stuff is being shared. Maybe someone's crying, but then you go front stage, right? There you just have to say, I'm looking my best. This is the smile I'm going to put on. I have to act like I'm happy. I'm performing that thing. We've all been in situations where we see the backstage enter the front stage. The person is walking out to meet their prom date and they're crying, right? Or you can tell they just don't want to be there. That's awkward. Then you could go back to the first lecture and think about what happens. Often we simply just let it slide, right? Civil inattention. Maybe we make a joke about it. Or maybe we give the person a chance to explain, right? You actually engage and let them go through the corrective process. So you've got backstage and front stage. Again, tons of examples of situations like this. Could be the first date. Could be a first day of class. Could be a sporting event, like I said before. Could be going to a mechanic, right? And you're trying to act like you actually know something about your car and you don't. There's that front stage persona you're putting on because you're worried about them taking advantage of you. Could be about going to a concert. You go to a music festival and you want to look like you belong. So you dress in a certain way and you act like you know bands that you might actually not know. You know how to perform the excitement of being there, even if you're not actually feeling it. We've all been in those situations. If you're performing a role that you don't feel fully committed to, going back to day one or the first video related to symbolic interaction, that's a cynical performance. If you believe in yourself, I am someone who knows about cars. I am presenting myself as I do know about bands. These are real performances. That's more sincere, right? So those sincere and cynical are the two ends of the spectrum. We're always somewhere in between. The goal, again, is not to understand the actor, the individual. Similar to what I said last time, it's about understanding the traffic rules. It's about understanding the play, right? Why do the actors act the way they do? What are the rules of that particular role or performance? Again, don't get focused on the individual. It's not about that one person in the blue dress, although there's a bunch of them. It's not about that one person in the blue dress. It's about why when people go to a prom, do they wear dresses like this? What does this ritual even tell us, right? What happens in these places? Why is it that we have to act like we're happy? Why is it that we have to smile? Why is the prom such a big deal? Why do we wear particular types of shoes? Why do we spend so much money renting these type of things, right? Like there's all these questions about what goes on. This also goes back to culture, right? Symbolic interaction is all directly tied into studying culture. Subcultures, in a sense, are a collection of roles. As a group, you get together and you perform a role, and that brings you together. You can actually, with a subculture you feel close to, you can reveal some backstage qualities even, right? Any subculture that you're part of, you are going to be playing a certain role. It's going to establish the personal front, right? It's going to establish what you want to look like, how you're going to act, how you're going to dress, whether you're going to smile or not smile. And it's also going to establish the settings that you would go to. If you're someone who's a bodybuilder and that's your subculture, there's a role that you're performing, right? There's a setting that it's going to guide you towards. Now, I just want to give you a moment to think about the importance of symbols and how much they matter and how good we get at reading them. How often we can pick up on the tiniest symbol and think about what that indicates about the person wearing it, right? So think about the difference between seeing someone wearing a leather jacket and a windbreaker. How much information is communicated just in that jacket? A flat brim hat versus a low profile hat, right, with a rounded brim. Two different baseball cap style hats. One has a flat brim, one has a rounded brim. How much does that communicate, right? And I hope you're envisioning these in your head and just thinking about how when people wear them, same person could put on these two different hats and they can mean different things. One's backward, one's forward. One's sideways, one's backwards, right? Different size, different style, different wearing communicates a ton of different symbols. High-rise jeans versus low-rise jeans, right? How much is communicated with that? Doc Marten boots versus high heels versus basketball shoes versus winter boots versus dress shoes, all communicating a ton of information. The difference between a slim tie, a wide tie, a bow tie, and no tie, right? These little things we're always communicating by making these choices. Sometimes it's about trying to perform a role. Sometimes it's succeeding in performing a role. And that's the other thing that's important. Again, going back to the sincere and cynical. Sometimes it's hard to perform roles. They seem foreign to us. We're scared about performing them. We think people will see us as being fake. Every time you perform a role, going back again to the first video, in a sense, you are taking a line. People don't always accept that line. All right, now, before I conclude talking about symbolic interaction, I want to shift a little bit to thinking about how symbolic interaction, how those ideas of taking a line, how those that idea of face work, that idea of the dramaturgical model, how that also can relate to studying deviance. So symbolic interaction does provide a foundation for understanding why people engage in deviant activities. Deviant activities means going against the norm. Oftentimes, when we talk about studying deviance, we're talking about studying crime. Deviance doesn't have to be crime, but crime is an example of deviance, right? You go against the norm, you go against the law. Symbolic interactionists take a micro view of society. So they take a micro view of why crime or deviance happens. They examine the beliefs and assumptions that people bring to their everyday interactions, and here is where they look to find the causes or explanations. So we're zoomed in. Again, this is micro. We're zoomed in on the individual, and we're trying to figure out how a person interacts with others and how he or she responds to their surroundings and how that helps us understand why a deviant act occurs. And it could be, I'll give some examples of deviance, but it could be something as small as being a member of a subculture where you're skateboarding where you're not supposed to. It could be you're supposed to dress up and you don't dress up, or it could be armed robbery. Those are all examples of deviance. Now, conflict theorists and functionalists take a very different approach where they look at society in a more macro perspective. And conflict theorists talk a ton about deviance, and they say, well, deviance is often the result of the rich and powerful controlling resources, and we commit crimes because we don't have enough access to basic goods and services. That's why poor people will commit crimes. And wealthy people commit crimes to increase the power and wealth that they have, right? So it's about power. Symbolic interactions want to understand on the micro level what's going on. One of the most basic ways that symbolic interactionists explain deviance is labeling theory. This is something that you'll hear in psychology. It's something that you'll hear in social psychology. It's something that you'll also understand or learn about in criminal justice. Labeling theory is this basic idea is that people see how they're labeled and they begin to accept that label as being true, right? You unconsciously notice how others see you, how people are labeling you, and over time you begin to internalize those labels and you accept them as actually being accurate. You then begin to behave in accordance with those expectations, right? You've been labeled something, you've been assigned a particular role or value, and then you start to do that deviant thing that goes along with the label. In this way, deviance is a social construction. People labeled you away, so you start to do it. Labeling individuals at a basic level leads individuals to act out those labels. This is especially true if the labels are anchored or confirmed among a lot of other people, especially agents of socialization. By agents of socialization, I mean people who play a particular role in teaching you who you are. If a child is labeled bad by their parent, and then by the school, and then by after-school care, and then by friends, the label is more likely to become part of your self-perception, right? If just a friend acts like you're bad, who cares? But if it's your parent, then the school and your teachers, and then after school, and then other friends, right, that label becomes stronger and it starts to stick. The way it happens is there's a primary act of deviance. That's the first act of rule breaking. Might be an accident, might be on purpose, but you do something and then you get labeled as deviant in a particular way that influences how other people think and act towards you. And then the second time you rule break, you're actually starting to play out that new label, right? You could think of the first time, everyone knows someone who was the class clown in high school, right? The first time they made a joke might have been intentional, might have just been like, spur of the moment, accidentally say something funny. A bunch of people laugh at that person, and then they're like, oh, people are laughing at me. Then other people start to say, oh, you were the class clown, and then later on you try out giving another joke, and people laugh again. And then people start to expect that from you. So it goes from a primary act of deviance to a secondary act of deviance, and then it gets stronger and stronger and repeated more and more. Right? So that would just be an example of the classroom. This happens all the time in the classroom. You get labeled a good student, or you get labeled a bad student. And then other people start to think that, and you start to internalize it, and then it plays out. Now, stigma, which I mentioned earlier when I was introducing Goffman, stigma is a negative social label, so a label, right? So we talked about labeling. Stigma is a negative social label that changes your behavior towards a person and also changes that person's self-concept and social identity. It's something that has serious consequences. It limits the opportunities that you have. Right? If you are part of a stigmatized group, then there are less opportunities available. This could be a physical stigma, could be a moral stigma, which is like a character flaw, right? But it devalues your input in the group setting. It could be a stigma about a group that you're part of. If there's a negative view towards a religion in a society, that stigma could be, hey, that person is that religion. So that could be something that you're born into. It could be your ethnicity, could be your socioeconomic status, right? We could all think about how in school, it could be embarrassing to not have money. When I grew up, my family didn't have much money. I would always get free lunch at school, and I was scared that people would know that I was poor, and I didn't want that stigma to attach to me. So when I would get free lunch every single day, I acted like I was charging. When you forget your money, so you're charging lunch and you'll pay it back later. Every single day, I just acted like I forgot my money again, or acted like I prepaid at the beginning of the year, or that I would cash out later, right? Even though I was getting free lunch, I just didn't want the other kid behind me in line to pick up on that clue, right? Because I was worried that it would provide a stigma to me, and then other kids in school would give me less social opportunities because they knew I was one of the poor kids, right? Now, we could talk about how that stigma is ridiculous, right? How that stigma doesn't make sense. And we could get into conflict theory and be like, why is it that poor kids who already have less opportunity are judged negatively in a social setting? So there's lots of questions we need to ask. But at a basic level, we could say that's a stigma that we could be scared of. Stigma is often gendered, right? Think about the fear that happens at younger ages, but can even happen at older ages, of being labeled as being sexually promiscuous, as someone who sleeps with lots of people. That judgment is not the same in most cases, right? Depends on the social group you're part of, but generally in our society, there's a negative stigma attached to girls and not a negative stigma attached to boys. Think about all the different labels that could be attached to a girl who is, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but they're perceived to be sleeping and having sex with lots of people. Think of all the terms. Maybe take a moment and list some of those terms. Now think of all the terms that would be attached to the boys. Which ones are more commonly negative, right? Is there any moral judgment? Who gets the stigma attached to them, right? So this tells us a lot about society. All right, final thing that I want to go through, and I know this lecture is a little long, but that's because you don't have a chapter from the textbook to read this week. So the final thing I'll point out is this idea of broken windows theory. This builds on symbolic interaction. It builds on a symbolic interaction understanding of deviance. This is incredibly important because it's affected lots of social policy and lots of debates at a national level. So Philip Zimbardo, who was a social psychologist, kind of weird guy who's been discredited in a lot of ways, he had this study where he put a car in a rundown neighborhood, and then he put the exact same car in a neighborhood that looked more like this, right? So he put one car in a very affluent neighborhood, one in a more rundown neighborhood, and his theory was, well, his test was, let's see what happens to the car. And what he found was, after a period of time in this neighborhood, the car ended up being vandalized. I think the wheels were stolen. Someone spray painted the car. Nothing happened to the car in this neighborhood. So he came to the conclusion, oh, okay, it's about he came up with this idea of broken windows theory. And this was, again, a study by Philip Zimbardo. It was made famous by a criminologist, George Kelling. It influenced the policies of mayors and governors across the country. Famously was put in place in Boston, famously was put in place in New York City. And the idea was, with broken windows, that the social context and social cues impacted the way that individuals acted, right? So in this place, it was seen as safe or acceptable to take parts of the vehicle, to vandalize the vehicle. In this setting, it wasn't acceptable, right? So the social cues impact us. Now, following this logic, broken windows theory was established, and the idea was we are going to police even the most minor crimes, because the idea was if people see other people committing minor crimes, it makes us think that those type of activities are acceptable and they will lead to more significant crimes, right? That was the logic of broken windows. So you saw this implementation of lots of small crimes, especially small crimes related to the actual built environment, being heavily policed. Graffiti was seen as a very serious crime, and there were task forces established to arrest everyone who was in any way creating graffiti. Littering was seen as a more significant crime. Selling minor drugs was seen as very serious. A lot of places followed this and implemented things like stop and frisk, right? The idea is we are going to create the idea that everywhere is being policed, and even small crimes are going to have significant consequences leading to more serious crimes. So we're going to arrest people committing small crimes, and we're going to prosecute them. That was the logic of it, right? So this has real consequences. These are policies being implemented. However, you could think about how symbolic interaction would also help us critique that logic of broken windows, right? What are the consequences if through stop and frisk, people are being stopped by the cops over and over and being checked for drugs, being checked for doing something wrong, even if you're not doing something wrong, or even if you're doing something minor? What happens considering labeling theory, right? Maybe you're engaging in a small act of deviance, or maybe you're engaging in no deviance, but suddenly you get that label attached to you over and over. Oh, people see me as a criminal. Maybe that's going to make me actually act like a criminal. Or maybe it makes me think I have a stigma attached to me in society, even though I'm doing nothing wrong, right? And the thing that we've seen as we look at studies, stop and frisk isn't completely random. Over and over, studies in cities have shown that people of color are more likely to be stopped and approached by the police than people who are white, right? So how does that play out with labeling theory? Now, for this reason, some people are very critical of broken window theory. Other people have tried to say, hey, we're actually using broken window theory wrong. Broken window theory shouldn't focus us in on the individuals and policing small crimes. Instead, it should focus on the power of setting itself. So a lot of cities have said, hey, if we want to reduce crime, maybe we need to clean up the city, right? Maybe instead of having that rundown park that ends up being a place where drug dealing occurs, maybe we clean up that park, right? Maybe we create it as a space where families feel comfortable walking around and people walk around. And when those spaces are used, when they feel safer, it's less likely for crime to happen there. So different implementations of the same type of theory. So I'm hoping what that does is show this sociological perspective of symbolic interaction, right? We've done a lot of things with it, including talking about the dramaturgical model. But it also has very serious consequences when you apply it to things like crime, when you apply it to things like education, when you apply it to things like mental health and depression, right? All of these things can be understood through this perspective of symbolic interaction.